Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to the Audit and Standards Committee. So we're Monday 21st of June. So before we start our agenda, I'd just like to extend a very warm welcome to our latest independent persons, Mr. Patrick Farmer. So thank you very much for joining us. Okay, so moving on first of all to agenda item number 1, election of chairman. If I can hand over to Robin Bennard.
Thank you, Chairman. Evening, members. So item 1 is the election of the chairman for this committee for tonight and for the rest of the municipal year. Do I have any nominations?
Is
that seconded? Yes. Is there any other nominations? No. Councillor Gion?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice and easy. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to run this committee for the last year, and I'm looking forward to a further 12 months. So thank you very much for everybody. Okay, agenda item number 2. So that's our minutes. So to authorise chairman to sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of March. If it's okay with everybody, I will sign those together with all of the pack from the previous year. Everyone's happy with that? Great, thank you very much. Okay, apologies for absence, please.
Councillor Harmer, Mrs. Jan Gray, and Darren Wells and Trevor Greenleaf.
Agenda item 4, additional agenda items. Do we have any additional items? No, thank you. Okay. Item number 5, so disclosures of interest. So to receive any disclosures by members of personal and disclosable pecuniary interest in matters on the agenda, the nature of any interest and whether members regard the personal interest as prejudicial under the terms of the Code of Conduct. Members are reminded of the need to repeat their declaration immediately prior to the commencement of the item in question. Do we have any declarations this evening? No? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so we start with the standards element of the meeting. So our first report is our local government and social care ombudsman complaints monitoring. And if I can hand over to Mark Adams to introduce the report, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, members and independents. I'd like to introduce the report for our Ombudsman complaints monitoring. So between the 14th of November 2020 to the 28th of May 2021, there were 2 Ombudsman complaints, both of which related to planning. Both of these, the Ombudsman did find fault with how we've handled the complaints in terms of the delays in response and in terms of our communication with the complainant. So we have had to pay compensation on both of these. There are elements of these that relate to planning enforcement. The complaint ending in 111 was during COVID, so it spanned from March 2020, and there was secondary, and there were 4 actual enforcement complaints relating to this particular area, which have now been resolved in terms of we've taken action to remedy that, and the complaint ending in 161, that again was resolved with an apology in relation to the delay. But yes, we've had 2 complaints, both have been upheld. We have taken away some learning outcomes for these, of which we're going to have to provide a report to the Ombudsman, which has been, we've gone through the review where we've worked with planning in terms of how we can look at improving their complaint handling, and how we can better manage communications with customers in general. And I think that was a point that's come from this, is that, you know, as an outcome, we need to get better at our communication side, managing expectation, and keeping to our promises. So, you know, if we're going to provide an update, we need to make sure we provide an update. And a lot of these complaints could have been avoided. So that's something that we're going to be taking away as a result of this. In relation to non-Ombudsman, Ombudsman complaints for the same period, we received 125, of which 76 weren't actual complaints. They were service requests. So these are where customer has got an issue with a department. So rather than asking for that department to try and resolve it, they make a complaint straight away. So we have to allow the department time to resolve a complaint. So that was 76. Of that 125, 16 were treated as stage 1. And in the table in front of you, I've provided a breakdown for which area they cover, and also whether they've been resolved, whether they've been upheld, partially upheld. And then of that 125, 8 of those were treated as stage 2 complaints. And again, the table in front of you provides the breakdown for the area that they cover. And then at the time of writing this report, there were 18 complaints that were under investigation, and 7 of these were awaiting triage. So they'd literally come in the week that the report was being produced. So we haven't got round to assessing those and issuing them to departments to respond. So that includes, I suppose, the reports in terms of our monitoring. And again, there's some takeaways that we can improve on in terms of what departments can do to better, just try and stop complaints coming in. That's something that we're going to be picking up with departments to improve. So happy to accept any chairman's comment.
Right, thank you. Do you have any questions for Councillor Kirby-Green?
Thank you. I don't have a question, but I'd just like to, I think I know one of these complaints. I think it used to be my ward. And I just want to say I was copied in on the correspondence, forgive me if I'm not talking about the right one, right at the beginning. And I just think that it's all about communication. It was, we get very, very defensive when things are, questions are asked. And I just think that if it is the one I'm referring to, it could have been, it didn't need to get that, we could have dealt with it, I believe. Okay. I just want to reiterate your comments. And then Mark has to pick up, you have loads of work to do. And I think we just do need to look at our processes inside, because I think that one certainly shouldn't have got to where it did if the individual had been sort of treated with a bit of respect and actually, dealt with properly and politely rather than sort of dismissed out of hand. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for your comments. Councillor Cortell.
I wanted to ask, Chair, how the 15 complaints on page 3, 8 for strategy and planning and 7 for housing. How old are they? How long does it take on average to deal with a complaint?
Thank you, Chair. I'll happy to answer this. So I've got some figures for you in terms of average time. So for all of those complaints in the reports, the average response time has been 15 working days. But then again, on max response time, there was one complaint that took 78 days to respond. So there are some, we do try and prioritise complaints to get them investigated and responded to as soon as possible. Again, it is working with departments to try and look at what work they've got going on, as well as the complaint side, and the ones that do relate to planning have been understandably taking a long time to try and resolve due to the sheer volume that they have been receiving in terms of their workload, particularly around enforcement.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Okay, so just from my perspective, I think it's important to remember with complaints for any organisation, complaints can be really valuable. So, you know, whilst we don't want a huge influx of complaints, any complaints that we do get, as long as we act with them appropriately, it can serve as valuable feedback. One of the points that I wanted to raise just around the Ombudsman complaint specifically is that we know that a complaint that goes to an Ombudsman has a financial cost to the council. In terms of that's anything that we can do, as Councillor Kirby-Green quite rightly said, to avoid getting to that stage. I think that, you know, that needs to be taken as priority. In terms of an ask moving forward, and I know obviously we've had a discussion around this already, is around what can we do to make sure that we have an agreement between departments, because on these two complaints it looks like the reason for them escalating is the lack of communication, but also the unnecessary delays within that. And whilst we have service level agreements in terms of how quickly we will speak to the complainant themselves, what we don't have is any kind of agreement in terms of how we look after that complaint internally. So should there be a standard where we have a complaint raised within one department, that we expect a response from the other department within an acceptable time frame? So that's just something that I'd like to see reviewed moving forward. Okay, great. As we have no other questions, and the report is for noting, if I could have a proposer for this report, please. Councillor Cortell, thank you. And a seconder. Councillor Kirby-Green, thank you very much. Okay, so we don't need to do a roll call or anything like that for this one. So all in favour of this report? Any against? Brilliant. Okay, great, that's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to our second standards agenda. So that is our Code of Conduct, Complaints, Monitoring and Other Standards Matter. And if I can hand over to Lisa Cooper to present the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and evening members, everyone present. I'll summarise the report. Chairman, there have been 3 valid Code of Conduct complaints against 3 district councillors since the last meeting, all 3 concerning the use of social media during the election campaign for the recent Bexhill-on-Sea Parish Council elections. All 3 complaints were dismissed. 2 cases involved members using their own private social media accounts in a private capacity. And the 3rd allegation was found not to be a correct fact anyway. Social media does present some grey areas for members, officers and the public alike, particularly around election time. And this is an area in which I think further guidance will be beneficial in the future. The district case referred for investigation last year, has also now concluded, and the allegation was unproven. The Chief Executive has worked with both parties following the outcome of the investigation. Brief details of those cases are set out in Appendix 1. Moving on to independent persons. This meeting is the last meeting for 2 of our independent persons whose term of office will expire on the 10th of July this year. Sue Fellows and Jan Gray. Obviously Jan's not with us tonight, unfortunately, but Sue and Jan have been IPs for the council since 2013, and I'd like to personally thank them for all the help and support they've given me during that time, since I've been doing this role since 2018, so thank you. Training, there's been no formal standards training since our last meeting, and I'm still hoping to arrange a learning exercise in the coming civic year, perhaps using some cases from other authorities as a sort of swapping exercise. I still need to explore that. I haven't done that, Chair. Bexhill Town Council, as members will be aware, we've had a new Bexhill Town Council created, and as the principal authority, this council becomes responsible for dealing with any code of conduct complaints that may arise against the new Bexhill Town Councillors. So we now have an additional 18 town councillors to keep an eye on. Nolan principles, you may recall at a discussion at the annual council meeting, the use of the term of the word should rather than must was raised with regard to the 7 principles, which is an appendix to our code. Whilst we're unable to obviously change the words should to must within the appendix, because that's the Nolan principles as written, however, we can obviously make sure our own code is worded in such a way But the general the general obligations set out in our own code between paragraphs 3 to 7 do use the term must anyway, and these broadly reflect the principles. So anyway, should the council look to adopt a new code in the future, we can, word it how we see fit in any event. And then one other item, Chair, that I forgot to put in my report was one of the 2 parish council representatives, Councillor Smedley, is no longer a parish councillor. He resigned from Icklesham Parish Council, so we therefore have a vacancy for a parish councillor, and Rother Association of Local Councils will nominate another parish rep to join us, hopefully at the next meeting. Okay, so any questions, Chair?
Great, thank you very much. Just before we go to any questions, if I can just remind members to use the microphone button just so it transmits correctly to anyone at home. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Lisa? Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, on C2101, page 10, I'm taking it that factually we found the councillor address was not actually the administrator. Have we taken steps to warn the administrator that they should not use Rother District Council as a communication address?
Yes, Chairman. Yes, Councillor, that has happened.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Cortell.
C2002 on page 9. There was a sustained allegation of bullying over 9 to 12 months. It's been dismissed, but might I inquire what the process was in reaching your conclusion?
Sorry, it wasn't my conclusion, Councillor. It went to external investigation. So a private investigator investigated the complaint and concluded that it wasn't proven. So it was out of my hands.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Okay. So I would just like to reiterate Lisa's point, just to thank our independent persons, both Susan Fellows and Jan Gray, for your wonderful service over the last 8 years. It's been very much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so as we've got no further questions, if I could have a proposer for this report, please. Councillor Thomas, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Madeley, thank you. All in favour? Lovely. Any against? No, great, that's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so that concludes our standards element of the meeting. Best wishes, thank you. Okay, so if we can now move on to our audit element of the evening. So agenda item number 8 is our audit progress report and sector update from Grant Thornton. As we heard earlier, Grant Thornton aren't represented today, so I will hand over to Robin to introduce the report.
Tony.
Sorry, Tony, you can do it. Sorry, I'll hand over to Tony to introduce the report. Sorry, my apologies.
Chair, I thought I would do it again. Evening, committee. Yeah, so this is Grant Thornton's report. It's an update, it's a standard update report. I'll do my best to field any questions that members may have from arising from this report, and I'll happily feedback any issues and comments to Grant Thornton. So with regards to, I'll go through the report section by section. So that the first bit of the report is about the 2019-20 audit, which is still outstanding around the valuations issues, which were reported to committee the last 2 times, I believe now. We're currently awaiting some data from the District Valuation Office because the auditors want to go back further years to, if you like, proof check the valuations. We're hoping to get that in the next few days, and if we do so, then we'll be able to conclude the audit. Grant Thornton will be able to conclude the audit, shall I say, and we're expecting to have this done before the July Audit Committee. The 2021 audit will formally commence around about August, and that's the same for all our, or most of our neighbouring authorities that use Grant Thornton. Our accounts production has gone very well. It's nearing its conclusion now, and we're aiming to take a draft set of accounts to the July meeting. So that's good news in that respect. In terms of actually audited accounts, it's really difficult to call when we'll be able to take that to committee. It's out of our hands, and it's very much dependent on the pace at which Grant Thornton can conduct their audit. In their sector update, again, this is a standard part of their report. It covers about 4 issues. One of the issues was that they give because of the amount of COVID grants that central government issued during the 2021 financial year. They gave us some guidance on how to account for those grants, because some of them are different to the grants that we get to fund our own services. Some of these grants were, like, if you like, pass-through grants that went to businesses, etc. So we followed that guidance. Another part of the sector update was about local council finances in general and the precarious state that they're in pretty much across the country. Unfortunately, there's no surprise to members. We've covered this issue several times, I think both at Audit Committee and at Cabinet as well. The Public Sector Audits Appointments body have also reported stresses, what they call stresses in the audit process. And by that, basically the best way of summing that up is that most of the audit opinions, or over half of the audit opinions last year, were late. Now that's a combination of the impact of the pandemic, but there's also quite probably resource implications there for the external audit bodies as well. And the final part, just to draw members' attention to, is the publication of a SIP for Financial Resilience Index. And I know we've highlighted to members that whilst our situation with regards to our own reserves position is quite critical, we're by no means the worst organisation or in the worst position out there. But of course, that's not necessarily a comfort. So we've got a copy of the Financial Resilience Index, and we intend to assess that in greater detail and fold that in as part of the medium-term financial planning process to see where we are and how we stack up against not only neighbouring authorities, but also, I can't remember the exact phrase now, what's it called, benchmark authorities, or authorities of a similar sort of geographical size and population to our own. So that's it from me, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions if I can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? No? Okay, nice and easy. Okay, so report for noting again. So if I could have a proposer for this report, please. Councillor Kirby Green, thank you. And a seconder, Councillor John Barn. Almost. Next time. Okay, next time. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, all in favour? Great. That's none against. That's carried. Thank you very much. Super. Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 9, internal audit, annual audit and opinion 2020-2021. And if I can hand over to Gary to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Each year I'm required to deliver an internal opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's framework of governance, risk management and control. The opinion I expressed in this report is based on the audit work completed in 2020-21, results which also feed into the annual government statement, which features elsewhere on this agenda. Other items covered in this report is a summary of the performance of the internal audit service in 2020-21, a statement of how well we conform with the public sector internal audit standards, an update on whistleblower activity in 2021, and finally, my usual quarterly update on audit activity. I now outline a few key bits from the report. We go to paragraphs 6 to 9 on page 26. these outlining specific issues faced by internal audit resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. In summary, it was not possible to carry out routine audit work in the first half of 2020-21, and the annual audit plan had to be abandoned. But we came up with an alternative approach. A new, more flexible approach was adopted. This included quarterly work plans instead of working to an annual one, and the implementation of a number of shorter, more focused reviews focusing on business critical issues. Summary audit activity in Q4. We issued 6 reports in the final quarter of 2020-21. As usual, the executive summaries are reproduced in Appendix A, which is on page 33 onwards. 6 audits are council tax, business rates, ICT governance, benefits, debtors, and we did a short little COVID risk-related audit on state income. All of these reports provided good or substantial assurance on the overall governance arrangements, meaning that no areas of significant concern were found. Right, if we look at Appendix B now on page 43, this, you can't skip there. This tells you audits are completed in 2020-21. This shows that 90% of the audit work planned in quarters 2 to 4 was completed. However, fewer audits than usual were examined during the year because of the impact of the pandemic, meaning that results cannot be readily compared with performance in previous years. So, 90 probably higher than we got last year, but it's apples and pears, I'm afraid. Implementation of the audit recommendations. This is my usual quarterly update on the progress of outstanding audit recommendations. I chase it up each quarter and put it all on the table for you. It's in Appendix C on page 44, shows the figures. At the top of the table, you'll see that there's some progress has been made on the older year recommendations this quarter, and only 7 recommendations now remain. That's down from 13 in the previous quarter. However, 5 of these are long-standing recommendations from 2018-19. Now, Chief Executive is aware of the situation and continues to work with the relevant heads of service to ensure the remaining recommendations are resolved as soon as possible. The table at the bottom shows all recommendations made in the first 9 months of the current financial year. That can't be right, can it? Last financial year. And all have been implemented. So there's no outstanding ones from the latest period. Counter fraud work and other financial savings. These 2 sections, paragraph 17 to 19, these show that how the internal audit team counter fraud activities and other audit workers contributed to over £39,000 worth of financial savings. The results of quality assurance initiatives. That's paragraph 20 onwards on page 27. Details the various methods used to measure the proficiency, effectiveness, and quality of the internal audit service. My annual self-assessment against our professional standards was reported to this committee at the last quarter, and the results of our first external peer review was reported in June 2017. Both of those demonstrate a high level of compliance with the standards. No quality assurance questionnaires were issued in 2020-21 due to the limited scope of many of the audits carried out during the pandemic. I am reintroducing them from this year. Performance measures. The table at the bottom of page 28 shows the internal audit performance against our targets in 2020-21. From this, you can see that whilst we met our target of completing 90% of the overall audit plan, we did not meet the governance audit target on this occasion because of delaying the completion of the payroll audit. However, this audit was already 95% complete on the 31st of March and was issued within 2 weeks after that. So, near miss. Conformance with the public sector internal audit standards. I can once again confirm that rather the internal audit approach generally conforms with the requirements set out in the professional standards. Overall assessment of the council's internal control systems, page 30, or paragraph 30 onwards, which is on page 29, explains this. The main takeaway here is that internal audit did not highlight any significant concerns with the internal control environment in 2020-21, which is good for the council. My report then goes on to set out some of the known issues and areas of emerging risk that may impact on the council moving forward. Most of these are also being picked up in one form or another in the annual governance statement. Then the important bit of the annual report, the opinion on control environment, which is paragraph 33 onwards. This sets out the basis for providing assurance on how well things are operating in the areas audited during the year. Whilst this has been a very challenging year for us and some audit coverage has had to be reduced as a result, I still believe we carried out sufficient work to reach an audit opinion on the control environment. If we look once more at Appendix B on page 43, you can see no audits received a limited or minimum assurance rating, and all 44 of the control objectives examined during the year were met, at least in part. This leads to my conclusion, shown in paragraph 37. The key point to note here is that despite a number of issues found during the year, I'm still of the opinion that the council's framework of governance, risk management and control is adequate and effective. Finally then, on my report, the tagged on at the end is the whistleblowing activity in 2020-21. I like to report this every year just to give members an idea of what's coming in through the door, and doesn't really tell you much what's happened with them, but it lets you know what sort of response we're getting through the line and that. The final section is an Appendix D, and it gives you the statistics of what we've had during the year. I think we're fairly self-explanatory in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions you've got. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Gary. Do we have any questions? Councillor Portell.
I have one question in Appendix A. Whilst most of the assessments were very reassuring, there's just one item I'm a little bit concerned about under council tax audit. The collection and refunds that says there's a sound system for collection of income and refund of overpayments. That only has a partially met rating. And of course, some of the most vulnerable residents can be in serious financial difficulty due to delays in the refunding of overpayments. And I was just inquiring whether that could be made a priority moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chair. No, we didn't actually find any problems with refunds on that. You have to bear in mind that these control objectives are very general, all-encompassing for everything in that sort of area. The only two issues found on that were issue mentioned below was to do with the reconciliation of the income between the academy system, which is the revenues and benefits system, to the UB4BW system, which is the financial system, because you can get differences between it if any differences they need to be resolved, and to ensure fund transfers reallocated are subject to supervisory reviews. That's not to say anything's going wrong with them; they're just not being overseen. So I hope I can reassure members that there's not a problem with refunds that we're aware of.
Great, thank you. Councillor Kirby-Green.
I had two comments, or one question, a comment. I suppose the concerning one is the procurement issued on the 5th of October 2018. We're now approaching 3 years. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we can really blame the pandemic for that one. So I think that's a slight concern. The other one is, it's a question, and maybe it's my ignorance, but the whistleblowing activity, you say planning enforcement issue. So what I understand, obviously, benefit and council tax fraud. Someone rings up and says, I think my neighbour's claiming benefits, but they're working. But what does planning enforcement issue, what does that mean? Because there are hundreds of people ringing up the council complaining about planning enforcement. So what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, of course, bear in mind, these are only ones that come to me, and I wouldn't get the more routine complaints. These are ones that just come through the whistleblowing email normally.
Oh, right.
From memory, they were, wasn't very many, was there? Yeah, one of those certainly was someone was complaining about someone living in caravans. I'm not sure if that was in our district. I think it was right on the border of our district. one was. There was one. Yes, they're usually ones where people are saying someone's doing something, they're living somewhere, and they haven't got permission to do so, something like that. And I forward them on to the planning enforcement team to look into. But unfortunately, if they come anonymously, which they tend to do, they while they will bear it in mind and have a look, they won't necessarily investigate because they don't follow up. Complaints don't have a name to them. But you know.
Just clarify then, it comes via you rather than directly to clients. So two of them, you haven't gone straight to enforcement, which they normally do. They just come in on the whistle.
Yeah, for whatever reason, they felt it necessary to blow the whistle on the that the we was unaware of something, but that's not always the case. Sometimes we are aware, but those two I think we weren't aware.
Thank you.
Really valid point there. I think obviously this is an annual report, and I think it's quite good to look at them side by side with the complaints because they do. It's purely the channel that they come in. So as an organisation, whistleblowing policy has to be kept separate from everything else. And those are the ones that feed in, but we only see this once a year, whereas we get the complaint one a little bit more regularly. A really valid point. Thank you. Patrick Palmer.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the question really for my information, so I've got a lot to learn in this process. But on page 27, the counter fraud work, in paragraph 18, you say all these cases were followed up with the help of colleagues in revenue benefits team. An additional 37,000 was collected, and then go on to say clearly the total savings would have been higher had the government's coronavirus scheme not been in place at the time. Could you explain why that would be the case?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because of course, most small businesses and that didn't have to pay any business rates. It's as simple as that, really. So the fact we found they should haven't been paying it in the past, we can collect what they should have paid in the past, but for the current year, which we'd normally get them for as well, that they won't have to pay anything. So that also has reduced the amount of the saving.
Does that mean the government scheme then would stop people having to pay previous fraud issues?
No. If prior to them bringing the COVID measures, they owed us money for that. It was proven that they didn't pay the right business rates. Yeah, we could put in to collect those. They would be billed for those. Similarly, we've now got a note of what they've done wrong, or not done right, should I say? We've got, as soon as they get the full charge again, they will bill for it. So
you'll get the money in the end.
Yeah, it's just obviously for this year, for obvious reasons. They've had businesses have struggled and government's given support. So, but no, that's the main reason.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Okay, brilliant. Okay, so this is a recommendation. It be resolved that the internal audit activity and performance in 2020 to 2021 be noted, and that the audit manager's opinion on the control environment be approved. So if I could have a proposer for this report, please. Got you now. Councillor Mary Barnes, thank you. And a seconder. Councillor John Barnes, thank you. All in favour? Lovely, thank you. None against, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving swiftly on to agenda item number 10. So this is our Treasury Management Update report. And if I can hand back over to Tony again to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So committee will recall that they've received quarterly updates throughout the financial year 2021. So this is the quarter four, the final update of that financial year on Treasury management activities. Just one point to make, the numbers are still draft at this stage because obviously they're subject to external audit, but we don't expect many, if any at all, really, any changes to the numbers. So if I can go straight on to talk about investments. So in paragraph 4, members will note that total of our value of our investments held at the 31st of March was £32 million. And the committee will also note in paragraph 5 that since the last report in quarter 3, we've diversified our portfolio, if you like, by spreading our investments across several other financial institutions, all of whom have got very good, excellent credit ratings. Now, this doesn't give us an awful lot more in the way of interest income, because interest rates are very, very low still, but it does spread the risk to the council of losing investments in one organisation. And the table in paragraph 9 will give members a little bit more detail around that if they so wish to see that. On the subject of interest income, we achieved £324,000 of income last year, which is about 76k below what we initially budgeted for at the start of the financial year. It's 16,000 lower than what we forecast in Q3. Having said that, there are some positive signs for next year's budgets, because we've reset the budget level to reflect the drop in income that we experienced this year, and we also sort of reset the financial plan forecast as well to reflect lower than previously expected levels of income. So again, we're not really talking big numbers, not game-changing numbers, but at least it's mitigated one of our risks to the budgets. Property fund investments, if I could just draw members' attention to that. There's a table in paragraph 10, which it looks quite busy, but I'm afraid it's the best way I can present it, really. And really, the main story here is that the value of those property investment funds, we originally invested them £8 million, members will recall. They're still below pre-pandemic levels, but they have recovered very well and continue to do so. And in fact, I think as at Q1, when we reported the value of those investments, they dropped to about £7.3 million, and now they've recovered to, I think it's about 7.8 million. Sorry, I haven't got the benefit of two screens, so I can't really remember. But as I say, the main story to take away there is that the value of those funds are recovering, and indeed beyond the 31st of March, because the report had already been written for the 31st of March, they've also recovered in the new financial year as well. So it's all going the right way in that respect. So borrowing, well, activity throughout the year has pretty much remained unchanged, and due to the impact of the pandemic on the capital programme, we were initially anticipating much larger borrowing requirement to match an accelerated capital investment programme, but that's not happened during the year 2021. A little bit about non-treasury investments. As I say, as with borrowing, that's been very slow for the exact same reasons. Our rental income budget was about £59,000 below our budget of 1.9 million, so marginally lower. That's mainly due to property voids. We have made some very minimal level of rent write-offs during 2021. We had reported to committee in the past that we'd allowed for a provision of about 200,000, but we're nowhere near that figure. It's just a couple of £1,000 at the most, I think. So it's much better than we were initially fearing at the beginning of the pandemic. But members or committee should be aware that further write-offs can't be ruled out. They may still happen. Finally, Chair, if I may, just a little bit about the economic update. As it was at the 31st of March, it's changed even since then. But the outlook is much more positive, although a lot of uncertainty still remains, and I don't think that will become a surprise to anybody. The gross domestic product is predicted to recover much more quickly than previously reported to committee. Inflation remains low, although it did spike recently and cause some slight ripples in the financial markets. Unemployment is around about 4.5% at the time of writing, which is much lower than the Q3 forecast of around about 9%. As prices have continued to rise as well, although this is expected to tail off as a result of the stamp duty holiday, which will come to an end at the end of June. The Public Works Loan Board 50-year interest rate is the one that I usually give to members. That's been fluctuating between about 1.9 and 2%. So it remains low and an attractive time to borrow. So again, the takeaway point there, I think, is that there's plenty of positives, certainly a lot more than the last time we presented the report, but still need to be cautious. And again, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Councillor John Barnes, please.
Really, probably as much to Robin as anybody else. The property bond, obviously, one regrets the value is down, but it's really unimportant at the moment because what we're borrowing that for is income. And really, I'd ask two questions, I think. One, do we know the makeup of those funds, just to ensure they are investing in safe investments? We went for them because they had avoided retail. Office is beginning to look a problem unless you convert into housing. So I think it's quite useful if we are briefed on the content of those two funds. But my assumption is, and I just welcome it, confirmation, that we are not likely to need to draw the capital down in the next 5 years. And therefore the values, in a sense, are immaterial.
Great, thank you. Go for it, Robin.
So I'll start, and then Tony, you can finish me off. That's fine. In terms of the actual funds, yes, we do get reports from the property funds about where the investments go into different property sectors. What we'll probably need to do is then circulate that to members so you can get a chance to have a look at the overall analysis of their investments and where they are. I think you can see through the actual valuations, though, that the things are picking up for them whatever they're invested in, and therefore we can have some confidence that things are going in the right direction, as Tony has said. But we will be able to circulate to members the sort of a further analysis of those actual investments over the different categories and different sectors. So we can do that. In terms of the MTFP, yeah, the intention is that we hold on to those property investments throughout the MTFP life. So not draw on reserves to that extent that we need to call that money back. That's the intention. Obviously, I can't say for absolute certain 100% that will be the case, but clearly I'd hope within the next 2 or 3 years it as a minimum that we won't be able to draw those funds back and therefore won't have any capital losses that if we have to do that at some point in the future. But say for the MTFP at the moment, we're not expecting to bring that money back just yet.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Farmer.
A couple, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Linked to those funds, in fact, I did a bit of research today into the property market, and I understand these funds were purchased some time ago, and to be honest, unless they were purchased in the second half of 2019, when the market was at its peak, then apart from the drop, it's virtually recovered to where it was. So I'm quite surprised if the standard index of property market is showing that there should be a capital gain, but within these funds is still a loss. And my second question is, with 8 million to invest for the long term, which is what we've done, I'm quite surprised it's only in 2 funds, because normally diversification would mean with 8 million, you could spread that across a dozen funds in different types of markets, bonds or shares or properties, such that, you know, if one goes up, one goes down, you would have better diversification. But I don't know what the rules are, so that's what I'd do if it was my money.
Thank you. Thank you. Robin? Thank you, Chairman. I'll have another go. I'm sure Tony will come in if. Go ahead. In terms of the losses, I mean, part of the equation you've got to also take account of is that the buying price and the selling, or the selling price and the buying prices are different. So we buy in at a certain level, and there is an immediate capital loss on the selling price. So we've got to recover that, and we were almost recovered before the pandemic. Then the property prices or values fell down, and therefore we saw the capital losses come back into play. But prior to the pandemic, we were almost at a point where that capital difference between the buying and selling price of those bonds was almost in balance. So that's part of that equation. As you say, I mean, ultimately we expect those to be in a positive capital position based upon what we can see happening in the property market. In terms of the number of investments, what we did at the time was we had a look at a number of funds with the availability of the money we had, the 8 million, and the 2 funds that we invested in are the ones that we felt were the most appropriate for the authority based upon our criteria and based upon our risk appetite at the time. So that's why there's only 2 funds as such, because they were the 2 that we felt were the most appropriate fit for the authority within our overall Treasury strategy. Clearly, there's an opportunities to revisit that, but not until we've cleared the capital losses. I think keep the money there until at least those capital losses are recovered, and then we can look at diversification maybe in the future, whether there are other funds out there that we can invest in that will give us a better return in line with our risk appetite, because that's always the key part to that equation. We want our money back at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor John Barnes?
Yes, the thing that slightly disappointed me is we've made no further acquisitions of properties for regeneration and income. Now, admittedly, our capital spending has also been badly delayed by COVID. But nevertheless, given the way our reserves are going to run down over the next 5 years, we do desperately need to make progress this year with making acquisitions that are going to increase our income. Otherwise, we shall be in danger of having to make cuts towards the end of this period. And that is not a comfortable situation.
I think, as you say, it was a difficult year, obviously, in terms of property acquisition. Also, there's been changes in government lending policies as well, which further impact upon our flexibility around investments as well. So, and effectively, they will not lend you money for profit for the day. So we have to tie with our regeneration plans, which is what the property investment strategy does, and that does largely limit you then to Rother District as an investment area. Clearly, then, if opportunities do come up, like we have done in the past with battle with the supermarket, we'll take those opportunities where it's appropriate for the authority. But it has limited our ability to invest even in the surrounding areas because of that change in government lending policy. But clearly, I think you will see in the capital programme, there are a number of items we are now at the point of starting to deliver. About 3 projects that hopefully will deliver over the next 2 years, and therefore we'll start to see that net revenue return authority. As you say, that is key for us then relieving that pressure on our reserves. So we're all very focused on it, and hopefully they'll all come to fruition over the next year.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. So yeah, just a couple of points from me then. So in terms of the diversification of the call money generally, I'm really pleased to see that the advice of the committee was taken forward in terms of moving those around. So whilst they're not going to attract any further interest or anything like that, which we know the environment that we're in, what it does is it adds another layer of safeguarding so that we don't have all of our eggs in one basket. So I was really pleased to see that. The second point that I know obviously we've already mentioned it previously, just around paragraph 16, for future reporting to the committee, I've asked if we can have the reference numbers converted into actual words so that it's really simple to see what the primary source, what the primary reasons for those lending loans were for. So when you scroll down and think, oh, you know, what are we still paying £1.6 million for, rather than a reference number, we can quite clearly link it across to paragraph 20 in terms of that, just to make it simpler for members. The final thing, which ties into Councillor Barnes' comment around what's happening with acquisitions, I think it'd be really important to incorporate moving forward some more info on our capital programme within this report, so that we can see what is coming up in the future. So where we're talking about what we spent already and what things we need to be looking at, it gives us an idea of what we need to, or what's coming up, because sometimes as members, you don't always hear about it from the right source, and you might see something on social media or you might hear something. So I've asked for that to be taken into consideration so that we've got a little bit more info before that comes up. Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, Councillor Thomas, I would be well aware of this. We are about to invest quite heavily in that. And obviously, why I suspect my regulations servicing costs. So we actually get fees.
Great. Thank you very much. Any further questions? No? Okay, brilliant. So this is a report for noting. So if I could have a proposer for the meeting, for the agenda, please. Councillor Richard Thomas, thank you. And seconder, Councillor Cortell, thank you. All in favour? Lovely, that's everyone. So none against. That's carried. Thank you. Great. Okay, if we can now move on to agenda item 11. So this is our annual governance statement 2020 to 2021. This is the late report that came in. And if I can hand over to Robin to introduce this report, please.
Chairman, this is a report that supports effectively the statement of accounts work as well. So it's the annual governance statement, which looks at our internal governance and our internal control environment for the authority. It's a standard report we bring to you each year. It sets out within the report the actual governance framework, and that's shown on page 4. So that shows you all the components in terms of our governance arrangements for the authority or different committees, including yourself as an integral part of that governance arrangement. And then it further analyses the arrangements under the 7 principles which we're required to analyse it, and they're shown on pages 5 to 9 of the report. There should be an additional item. Well, I'll pause. It is underneath the main pack. It's a separate line. Yes, yes. Right.
It was a late report, so it didn't get included in the first one, but it was sent out and attached separately.
Okay. Yeah. As I was saying, on pages 5 to 9, you've got the principles around governance, and they're set out in the report. The main bit I'll bring your attention to is probably in the latter part of the report, where it talks about those emerging risks and major risks that the authority is facing. And this really picks up on the work that Gary's done internally, but also those more national issues, such as our local government funding, the impact of the pandemic and the ongoing impact of the pandemic, and the Council's own commitment to the climate emergency as well. They're all set out in that latter part of the report. As I say, that gives members hopefully an overview of the governance in the authority and the issues that we are facing. And then that will also feed into the work that Tony and team do in terms of the statement of accounts. Happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Cortell.
Thank you. On page 9, you've got the emerging new corporate plan, 2 paragraphs in the bottom. And it doesn't seem to mention the key concept in the new emerging corporate plan, which is that we're aiming to be customer centric. And I wondered whether that could be included in that paragraph.
That's fine, Chairman. And amend and update it. Members' comments, yeah.
Right. Councillor John Barnes.
I was just wondering when we are going to look again at the risk register, because I'm very struck in this governance statement about some of the risks that are beginning to face us, particularly as the government keeps delaying its business rates review. And indeed, our business rates income is likely to be affected, it seems to me, by some of the measures the government is still taking in terms of rent restrictions and evictions. So I take it the review is well up to date, but when do we next look at it?
Chairman. So the corporate one obviously is up to date. We'll normally bring you that probably in September time for a 6-month review. But also, if you remember, we did all at one of the last committee meetings, we agreed that we would take service risk registers as well. So you can see, so the housing one, for example, which would then look at rent evictions or property evictions, that could then be discussed in a bit more detail. So I'll probably, I think we're aiming to do the first 2 in September, hopefully. And you'll have the head of service here, and you can then ask some questions about their individual service areas, as well as those more corporate issues. Might be a more conversation I think members can have, particularly around service-specific issues. Could be off the back of something that's national, such as COVID. So it gives you more in-depth discussion regarding those risks.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Palmer.
And my question is also about the risks and the risk register. On the last page, you talk about major projects and the setting up of the housing company. Clearly, some of those are very big, like Blackfriars. Will they have their own specific risk register?
Yes, Chairman. So yes, each of our major projects will have its own individual risk register, risk log, investigations, etc. So again, that can be shared with members if you wish to see those.
So that would come to this meeting?
Doesn't specifically come to this meeting. It's usually managed by officers as part of the capital programme project that they're delivering. But if members wanted to see individual risk register for a particular project, then we can bring that forward to see.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thomas.
And myself as the chair of the same corporation. But I'd also like to just raise a question. On page 11, when there is a reference to Alliance Homes, rather, it does mention the way in which it's governed through the officers. But would it also be good to mention there that it has a board of directors who presumably have ultimate financial responsibility and also responsibility, therefore, to the principal shareholder, which is the council itself? Would it be worthwhile to add that to the governance report?
And then we can make the clarification so that you can see how the Alliance Homes is set up, and in addition to the council owned projects as well.
That would be brilliant. Thank you very much. Great, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. Principle B on page 6, ensuring openness and stakeholder engagement. Whilst the main committees are open to the public, task and finish groups tend not to be. And I don't know whether it's appropriate to this meeting, but could we aim towards making task and finish groups and any subcommittees open to the public as well, except if there's a good reason not to do so?
I think we've had this discussion in a previous meeting, and I think it was kind of felt that a task and finish group is more about getting into the bones and debate and discussion rather than inclusion of the public in terms of a process. But certainly open to any further comments on that, Councillor Mary Barnes.
I'd certainly agree with that, with your point. I think there are cases when you really need to feel that you're part of an informal group coming to a decision. After all, it reports back, so it's not as if there's no transparency. So I can't see any reason why they should come in. And I think we get more work done as a working party by not having the public there.
Any other comments on that point, Councillor Madeley?
I'd just like to agree with Councillor Mrs. Barnes. I think it does give us the freedom. I mean, I'm on 2 at the moment, and it does give you the freedom just to make the comments you want to make without feeling you've got somebody listening behind you. Thank you.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions on this report? Councillor Cortell.
This may be a bit insensitive. On page 2, you mention heads of service self-assessments of their service areas. when I worked for a multinational company in the private sector, a successful one, I would add, there were 360-degree assessments. So my managing director had to be critically assessed by his senior managers. My head of department had to be critically assessed by members of his team. We actually held a meeting where we would assess our own line manager. That doesn't seem to have percolated into the public sector. And I wondered whether, in the interests of having a more inclusive organisation where the views of staff are taken into account, whether that could be considered in due course.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby-Green.
So it's not often I agree with Councillor Cortell. My background's in HR, and I was really surprised when I first became a councillor that I think that staff, we are a customer in effect, but we don't get the opportunity to give any feedback on staff performance, good or bad. And I've always found it astonishing, and I don't know where they get their feedback from, because as you say, most organisations do 360-degree feedback from employees and all the way around, obviously. And I would think that we should be part of that. But I was told under no uncertain terms when I was first elected, we don't get involved in that at all. So I don't know whether that's a rather district council thing or whether that's general public sector. But I would certainly agree with you, Councillor Cortell. I think that there should, because I think for good and, for positive reasons as well, is, sometimes members of staff who do a really good job don't necessarily get recognised in their annual performance review. So I totally agree with your comments. Yeah.
Thank you, Robin.
Just to clarify for the purposes of this report, self-assessment is about the internal control and governance issues facing the service, not regarding individuals' service or own performance. That's not appropriate for this item. That's a separate discussion. Clearly, just to comment on that, from my point of view, I'm not sure anywhere I've seen elected representatives assessing staff performance, which is what you're suggesting.
It's not assessing, it's contributing feedback to the assessment.
Members are free to feedback to chief executive or any other head of service if they feel an officer is performing well or has performed a task well or done something that they should be recognised for. Or equally, if you have concerns regarding the performance of an officer, clearly they can be referred to the relevant head of service or chief executive as appropriate. So not a problem in terms of that feedback loop. That's available to any member to do, but clearly, as I in terms of that process of annual appraisal or interim appraisals of where there's an explicit part of that process which is available to the members to participate in. We are looking at the new performance appraisal process following obviously the appointment of Malcolm to the chief executive role. He's looking at that in conjunction with members as well, cabinet, as to how the process might be taken forward around performance appraisal, particularly for the senior officer roles. So that might be something that members will become involved in and well aware of once that's been talked through and discussed as to how that might be taken forward. Something to watch this space. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Farmer.
Just a comment from a different sector. I spent a long time in governance in further education, and the way it worked in there is that the governors would assess the performance of the senior management team, but then the senior management team would assess their staff and report back up to the governors. So I don't know whether a similar sort of process might be to local government.
I think it's definitely some really valid comments. I think it's something definitely worth pursuing with the reshaping of appraisal. So at the appropriate time, I think it'd be valid to bring those comments back up to the floor. Great. Any other questions? No? Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so this recommendation be resolved that the annual governance statement be approved and that the statement be signed by the leader of the council and the chief executive. So if I could have a proposer, thank you, Councillor John Barnes, and a seconder.
Presumably, we're adding the two requests from myself and from Councillor Thomas to the report.
Yeah, we furiously scribble those notes down for you. No problem at all. If I can have a seconder for this report, Councillor Richard Thomas, thank you. All in favour? Great, that's everybody. That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, and the final one is our work programme. So just to add on to the work programme, we will have the risk management report from the environmental health to be added at some point. But any comments or questions on the report, on the work programme? No? Okay, so just an observation. So in terms of our standards appointed persons, they do leave us in time for the July, and at the moment we don't have any other standards reports until the 6th of December, unless anything comes in. So full council agreed with our recommendations to appoint Robert Brown as the independent persons for the audit as the standards element. So he will effectively start from July. However, the first meeting, according to this, will be December, unless any other standards reports come up in advance. So all in favour of the work programme? Great, thank you. Okay, well that concludes our meeting. Nice to see everyone's faces in person. So thank you very much. Concluded at 19:41, and I wish you all a good night. Thank you.